What's up guys, it's All the Cars here. Today I'm making a video. I know times are tough out there. It can be kind of hard to find a decent project car. I see all these videos online talking about big YouTubers, how they have like a 10 grand budget and buy a project car and stuff. But if you're like me, and probably most people, you don't have that kind of money lying around to just buy a project car. I know car prices have gotten a little out of control since COVID, but me and my buddies have still managed to find cheap cars, and these are 10 project cars that me and my friends have driven home since COVID. A couple disclaimers on this. These cars are 3 grand at most, and they aren't exactly nice cars. They won't be the cleanest cars you'll find. They won't be the most reliable cars you'll find. They're projects. And also, I know that I'm going to be missing a lot of vehicles out there, but these are just some examples that me and my friends have bought within the past 5 years, and they were all $3,000 or less, and we were able to drive them home. So let's get right into it. First off, we have the GMT800 platform Chevy trucks, which they built from 99 to 07. It's the Silverado, Sierra, Yukon, Tahoe, Escalade, Suburban. I paid $500 for mine. My buddy paid $400 for his. I have a buddy who bought an Escalade for really cheap, I think like $2,000. Another friend of mine bought a Suburban for really, really cheap. The pros of these things are that parts for these things are absolutely everywhere. These still are one of the most common vehicles on the road. Even in Michigan, where a lot of things rust and rot away, there's still countless of these things out there. The sky is kind of the limit for them. Everything that has been done can be done. I've seen people drag race them, drift them, make pre-runners out of them. I wheel mine. They make great tow vehicles. There really isn't much that you can't do with these trucks. And they are very, very cheap to buy. Like I said, I paid $500. My buddy paid $400 for his. I mean, these are very, very cheap, great trucks. Some of the problems with them, though, which one of the biggest and most well-known is the 4L60 is not a very good transmission. You can build them, though. The sky is also the limit for that. However, it can get pretty pricey pretty quick, as most project cars do. But don't let that deter you. I have a buddy who's putting a T56 in his right now, and there's really so much you can do with these things. And another con with them is, which is going to be a con for most of these vehicles, but a lot of them are very, very beat. Because they're so cheap and there's so many of them, people kind of see them as throwaway trucks. So they get kind of neglected, they get abused, people do stupid stuff to them and with them. So yeah, that's the first one. All right, next on the list is the SN95 Mustang. This is going to be the most expensive car on the list. I bought, for my first drift car, was my white Mustang. I'll throw a picture up of it. I'll throw pictures up of all these vehicles, but I paid $3,000 for it, and I got a lot of good seat time out of it before I discovered it was rotted. Which, I mean, it's a drift car that pretty much only was on the track, so who cares that much, but I didn't want to send a strut through the hood. Some of the pros of these things are the parts are very, very, very cheap. Like, you can set one of these up for very cheap. You can drag race them. I drifted mine. They're a pretty tried and true platform for most of what you want to do. And that being said, they are very easy cars to set up. But part of that is one of the cons of it, which is the suspension design is from the 1970s. They're a pretty old suspension design, but that does make them pretty straightforward and cheap to set up. Even like using really good quality stuff. I think I was only like $2,000 into my suspension, which sounds like a lot, but in project car money, that is just a drop in the bucket. Another thing that kind of sucks about these cars is the interior is god awful. I hated that interior. It feels cheap. It looks like an afterthought. It's pretty terrible. Like If you look at the dash in this car, you can tell that they use the same dash on the left-hand drive and right-hand drive markets because it still has the hump for the gauges. So that just goes to show. I mean, it really is just basically a V8 simple car. It's pretty easy to work on. It's pretty reliable. I mean, the V6s aren't bad either. I know you're going to get flack for driving a V6, but I've seen people drift the V6s and rip with them. So, I mean, you can mess with a V6 if that's what your budget is. I paid $3,000. A buddy of mine picked one up for a scrap price because it was going to go to scrap because the rear end was bad. It was still drivable though, so that's why I'll include it in the list. And his was a 4.6 car, so I mean, you can find the V8s pretty cheap yet. Next up on the list, this one is a bit controversial for me, BMW, and that's all of them. And I am not a huge BMW guy, but my buddy is. And part of why I'm not a huge BMW guy is because I've seen this guy buy as many cheap BMWs as he can to make, and I mean, he bought probably 3 or 4 cars to make one good one. So it didn't really run and drive when he bought it. But he does have a manual 550i that he paid, I think, $500 for. And I know you probably are not going to find a manual 550i for $500, but that doesn't mean that there are not plenty of other cheap BMWs out there. He's found cheap E36s, cheap E46s. He's got a couple E39s. I mean, you can buy these things for very, very cheap. And they are also pretty common. I mean, the older ones are sort of fading out where I am because they rust, but they're still common enough. There's so much aftermarket for these cars. Another thing is they're rear-wheel drive manual cars. I mean, you can't have more fun than that, in my opinion. Okay, the cons. Some of the cons for these things are, since it's a BMW, the reliability is very, very hit or miss. Me and my friends actually bought a 318 Ti. We had a trailer at home, and this thing had 400,000 miles on it, which is kind of crazy. And we beat that thing within an inch of its life. My buddy had a donut pit in his yard for years. So they can be reliable, but you never really know what you're going to get, which is kind of the downside. Another thing is, a lot of these cars, since they are so cheap and accessible, they have been touched by people who shouldn't touch them. I've seen a lot of hacked up stuff on these cars. Even coming through my work, I see a lot of hacked up stuff on these older BMWs. They're going to be fixing a lot of someone else's mods, basically, because there's not too many stock examples left of these things. Another thing is the parts can be expensive depending on what you want to do with it. The 6 speeds, I know, pull a premium, and they're super sought after and desirable. There's a lot of parts like that are sought after and desirable for these things, and some of them they don't make anymore. They do make a lot of stuff for them. I had a buddy who built an E30 basically from scratch with a blown engine, and you can still buy a lot of stuff for these cars, but it does get kind of tough to find stuff like any older car. Next on the list is the Ford Ranger, and these things are pretty common trucks yet. So one benefit is they are pretty cheap yet. I paid $500 for one from a customer. It needed a fuel pump. He was going to scrap it over that, and it was a perfectly fine truck. A little rusty, but it ran and drove great otherwise, apart from the fuel pump. So I bought it and actually drove it home. My buddy also got one for really cheap too, and I still see these things on Facebook Marketplace all the time. They're very cheap, and this is another one where mostly anything that can be done has been done with it. People make pre-runners out of them. I've seen people drift them. I've seen people even like autocross them. I've seen them drag race them. You can really do anything with these things. They're pretty tough little trucks too. They're pretty reliable. The cons though is, in terms of the engine, I mean, you can boost the 2.3, but there's not a whole ton of aftermarket for these things in terms of performance unless you're willing to swap the engine, which is kind of the difference between this and the Silverado. Is the Silverado and the GMT800s come with 5.3s, 6.0, 4.8. Those engines are very, very, very tried and true. And anything that can be done has been done with them. And a lot of these Rangers too, they're getting old, they're getting beat up like most of the cars on this list. So still a pretty good buy, and you can still find them for cheap. And it's a good platform if you want a small little truck. Next on the list is the Lexus GS300, which I obviously am biased towards, but I don't mean the first gen because, as I said in my Is It Worth Buying One video, the first gens are not really worth building unless you actually really, really, really want a first gen. The second gens, though, are a different story. I picked one of these up, black with black interior, for a little under $2,000, which, I mean, I see these things on Marketplace and I think they're kind of hitting their bottom dollar around $2,000 right now for somewhat decent examples, actually. Like, mine was rust-free and it was actually in really good shape. The only thing is the engine leaked oil because 2JZs leak oil. But they're very reliable cars. I mean, every 2JZ car I've owned, except for my new GS, has had well over 200,000 miles. Again, it has a 2JZ, so that's a benefit too. Everything you could ever want for that engine is still out there and available. The aftermarket on the second gens is pretty ridiculous compared to the first gens. There's body kits, aftermarket headlights, aftermarket taillights, just anything you could want aftermarket wise for these, there is basically. Not quite as much as like an SC or obviously a Supra, but it's definitely still out there. The cons to this car though are it's automatic only, which is kind of a huge thing for a lot of people, but I know if you're trying to just go fast, that doesn't matter so much. Another thing is you got to be careful because, at least in my area, a lot of these cars end up being takeover cars, which they're pretty hard to kill. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but you're still going to want to be weary of that and probably not buy a takeover car. And the other thing is they were not turbo. And like I said in my Is It Worth Building One, the two hoops you kind of have to jump through for this to be a fun car really are either boost it or manual swap it. Neither one is too cheap, but you can do a budget turbo build. I've seen plenty of people do it, and it makes the car a lot more fun. Next up, we have the Nissan Maxima. These cars are very cheap. And they have a VQ35 and they're pretty quick. I paid $800 for mine. I believe it was an 01. It was a 3.0 and a 5-speed, and it kept right up with a Charger RT, brand new. The guy was not too happy. These cars also were available with a VQ35 instead of the VQ30 and a 6-speed manual with a limited slip diff. So they can be pretty rowdy cars. I've seen in the Maxima groups a lot of people like to swap the newer engines into the older ones because that's like almost 300 horsepower right off the bat. The downside of these cars is a lot of people kind of saw them as throwaway cars, so they're getting a little harder to find. I haven't seen one in a while. It's also, unless you're willing to boost it, and not many people are willing to dump a ton of money into a Maxima, it's hard to do a whole lot more than just bolt-ons to these things. Don't get me wrong, they still make phenomenal daily drive, like fun daily driver cars. I loved mine and it was a blast. And I mean, the aftermarket is okay for them cosmetically. There's some stuff if you look. And the other thing is the newer ones have CVTs, which it's the CVT that you don't really want. So yeah, Maximas are pretty fun cars. You can pick them up dirt cheap. Like I said, I paid $800 for mine. Next on the list, we have the Mark IV Volkswagen. Jetta, Golf, Beetle, whatever. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I absolutely hate these cars. These things are basically the Hondas of my area, and that's no dig on Hondas, but you know what I mean. Everyone who owns one thinks they're the greatest thing ever, and I just don't like them at all and think they're ugly. But my friends love them. I have a buddy who buys these things for $500 all day. There are pros to these cars, I will admit. It's one of the only manual diesel cars you can really get into easily in the US. And they sound like tractors. They're kind of a riot in that aspect. They're also very, very cheap. Like I said, $500 is what my buddy likes to pick these things up for. You could get them with the 1.8 turbo. My buddies own some of those. The VR6 as well. There's a lot of knowledge out there on these cars. Like I said, they used to be everywhere like 10 years ago. It was every other car at the car meet, which is kind of why I didn't care for them. The cons are the reliability seems to be very hit or miss, kind of like BMWs. And parts are, I'm not entirely sure, but I think since the cars are kind of fading out, I think the parts are getting a little harder to find for it. And I know at work, at least, Volkswagen parts are typically a bit more expensive than like parts for a Chevy or something. And speaking of Chevy, next on the list, we have probably one of the cheapest cars on this list, the B-Body Caprice, Roadmaster, and Oldsmobile Custom Cruiser, if you can find one. The pros to these things is they are very cheap. My girlfriend paid $400 for her Caprice. I have a buddy who buys these things all the time for like $1,000 or less. It's pretty nuts, and I still see them on Marketplace. I've maybe seen one or two break like $5,000 at most. They're very cheap. They have a Chevy V8, the LT1, which is a pretty decent engine. You have to watch out for the OptiSpark on those, and you have to use a factory one, and I don't think they make factory ones anymore. So you kind of got to get lucky and find one that isn't bad, or an MSD. That's kind of what I gather from my buddy. That's kind of really one of the only major things to watch out for. The transmissions as well. I have a buddy who has one. It ran 13s, which for a car that size is insane. But he blows transmissions like it's nobody's business. The transmissions are also getting harder to find. I think he built one, but the car hasn't ran in a while. I hope he fixes it soon because that thing was sweet. Anyways, the other issue with these things is, like I said with the OptiSpark, factory parts are getting pretty tough to find for this thing. The interior parts are actually worth a lot of money. My girlfriend has a couple interior things in her car that she's owned it for almost 2 years now, and we haven't even been able to find them even in junkyard cars. They made so many weird different trims and variants of this car, it seems like, that a lot of the interior pieces are similar but not the same, so they don't fit. So that's kind of a con to them. Also, they are a very big car, which I like my boats, obviously. I've owned so many Lexuses, so this is not an issue for me, but you don't expect a handling beast. I mean, it'll be a fun highway ripper. I mean, my buddy beat a Civic Si in his piece of garbage Roadmaster that like is rusty and looks like crap. So yeah, these are great cars, very cheap to get into. You can build them up. They have a Chevy V8. I've seen people LS swap them, do all kinds of stuff with them. All right, next up on the list, we have the Volvo 240, which the Volvo 240 is a really neat car. They are kind of getting expensive, but you can still find some beat examples for cheap. My buddy traded a $500 Mark IV for one. It was a manual one too. And then I think he ended up buying it back later for like really cheap as well, like from the guy he sold it to. These things are rear wheel drive, manual. There's a lot of info out there on them. They were a pretty common car back in the day. So, I mean, a lot of people messed with them and built them. I've seen people swap the engine in them. They are a very simple car too. There's not much to them. Since they're older, they don't really have a whole lot of mechanical things to go wrong, and the electrical systems are pretty straightforward as well. The cons to this car, however, are it's pretty hard to find parts for these. There's a guy locally who has basically a 240 junkyard, and that's kind of, I have a couple friends who've owned these cars. That's kind of how they were able to keep them on the road and keep them alive, was just going to this guy and getting parts. But that being said, it's a rear-wheel drive manual car that you can buy for cheap. A fun project car for sure. And last on the list, we have the Pontiac Grand Prix. I don't know about where you guys live, but where I live, these things are everywhere. They're kind of fading out now, but you can still find them very easily. The pros to these things are they were offered with a 3800, which is a very reliable engine with a lot of aftermarket support behind it. I actually live kind of by ZZ Performance, who did a lot with these cars. The 3800, you could get it with a supercharger. You could get it with the LS4 V8 as well. You can pick these things up for very, very, very cheap. I think my buddy paid $500 for his, and it was a GTP with a supercharger. The aftermarket support, like I said, from ZZP, I think they kind of started to move away from these 3800 cars a little bit and move on to newer stuff, but there's still a lot you can do with them. The cons are their front-wheel drive, which a front-wheel drive V8 is not the greatest idea ever. And they're automatic only, and the transmissions in these things are not the strongest. I've seen people blow multiple transmissions on these things. You can get them built and tuned and stuff, but it's still, it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when, if you want to build this car up. But that being said, they're a great, cheap platform to get into. They are fairly reliable, and apart from the transmissions, and GM made so many of these things. Like I said, I still see them like fairly often, and they're just pretty decent cars. They're not going to be a handling monster. It's a GM cruiser basically, but you can make them pretty quick. But that is the list of the 10 cars that me and my friends have driven home since COVID. This is just kind of proof that you can still, everyone keeps complaining that this hobby is getting more and more expensive, which it definitely is, but you can still have fun on the cheap with some of these cars here. Like I said, I'm sure there's plenty more. If you guys have stories of cheap cars that you've bought in the past 5 years, throw them down in the comments. I'll read them. Otherwise, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.